Well, Brown, Americans are feeling a lot better about the economy after a scary March and April. We saw the consumer confidence in May went up. It went way up. This was better than expected. In fact, this was the biggest 1 month increase for consumer confidence in four.
So I don't think it was scary March and April. I think maybe, there were things that were happening that people weren't used to, right? That there was a little bit of an unknown, to the system, to the environment. Scary is kind of a word that, there's a little bit of a connotation there.
For years. And when we look at the trend, you can see that confidence really took a hit at the start of this year. You see this really sharp decline in consumer confidence. This, of course, was happening as the president was ratcheting up tariffs and as the stock market was plunging. In fact, confidence had really gotten to the lowest levels since COVID, which is pretty stunning when you think about it. But now we do see this significant uptick coming as there's been some de-escalation in the trade war. And obviously this historic rebound on Wall Street is also helping to boost confidence. And when we look at
Again, when I look at these things, it's usually my first time seeing them. De-escalation in the trade war. Again, what about a resolution to the trade war, right? The deals are being made. The idea that Trump had in mind is coming to fruition. It's being accomplished. There are accomplishments being made. So it's you got to kind of just look at the way they phrase things, even when they're being, when they're highlighting something that's positive or something that's true. You still have to kind of parse and see where what the subtext is saying in all these cases, in all of media.
Look at the internals of this report. There are a lot of positives here, right? People are feeling a lot better about the current situation. Their short-term outlook went way up. This was the biggest 1 month increase for this metric since 2009 during the Great Recession. Also, recession fears, they went down, and this was a widespread shift in sentiment. The Conference Board, which conducts this survey, said that the rebound in confidence was broad-based across all age groups, all income groups. They also say it was shared across all political affiliations with the strongest improvements among Republicans. Now, this is important, of course, politically for the White House and for Republicans in Congress, but economically, this is significant because consumer spending is the biggest driver of the U.S. economy. And so the fact that consumer confidence has rebounded, it's obviously still at relatively low levels, but it's starting to move in the right direction. That is good news. Brianna?
What's driving the big rally on Wall Street, Matt?
Yeah, well, when you take a look at the market, you see the Dow, the S&P, and the NASDAQ all solidly higher, a 2.4% increase for the NASDAQ. And, this is a familiar playbook, right? Every time we see the president ratchet up tariffs and tariff threats, we see the market drop. And when he walks back those threats, the market rebounds. And we're seeing that happen again. This time, the focus is on the president's threats around EU tariffs. Now, just to remind you where we are there, back in early April, the president said he put a 20% tariff on the European Union, America's biggest trading partner. Then when markets freaked out, he walked it back, 90-day delay. Instead, he put this 10% universal tariff on. Then on Friday, the president really startled investors by saying, actually, we're going to do a 50% tariff, and it's going to start on June 1. And then after a positive phone call with officials in the EU over the weekend, the president said that those tariffs are going to be delayed until July 9. Now, when you look at the trend for the market, you see markets have continued to rebound from this really sharp decline earlier this year. This was all driven by trade war fears, all driven by worries about recession. But now we have this historic rebound with the market really coming back from most of those losses. But it does seem like we're still going to be held hostage in some ways to the ups and downs of the trade war. I talked to market veteran Art Hogan, and he said, look, unfortunately, in this scatterbrained, haphazard delivery of trade war news, this market will be held hostage by every tariff utterance on social media. And so,
yeah, but that's because negotiations are happening, right? They're talking to what he's putting out in public is not necessarily what's happening in private. What he's putting out in public, he has to be careful with. He can't show you all of his cards. He can't say what the final deal and final result is going to be. If you could see, if you're looking across the board, had Trump come out and just say, I'm going to put a 10% tariff across the board universally, no ifs, ands, or buts, it is what it is, the market would have done that initial tanking and might have not recovered to where it has now. What he did, he levied massive tariffs upfront. And then as people said, listen, we want to talk. Let's talk this through. Let's make a deal. What did he do? He scaled them back all down to everyone's still at 10%. There's nobody that's not at 10%, which is, 10% higher than in many cases than it was before. So he got that 10% bump, rode the ups and downs of the market. And now everything's leveled out and kind of plateaued, but he's still getting the 10% deal. He's still getting the deal. And that's the way these things are going to work. And traders and stuff like that, people in the business world, they may not like it. So if they're people that are smart, they will like it because they just have to play the game. What's the game? Trump announced the tariff, market drops, everyone panics. Something gets resolved, it comes back up. So you can make a fair bit of money if you're smart in the market that's at its current state.
Brianna, it does seem like at any moment we're basically one Truth Social post away from either a 700-point rebound in the market or a 700-point drop. You just can't look away because
if you guys can subscribe to the channel, it really helps me out a lot. If you hit the like, if you like the content, if you want to talk about it, leave a message in the comments. We can have a conversation. Let's continue the video.
the trade war news is coming just so fast.
Fun times. Matt Egan, thank you so much.
Thanks,
Boris?
Brianna.
Let's discuss these fun times with Scott Lincicome. He's the Vice President of General Economics at the Cato Institute. Scott, great to see you as always. So you have the biggest monthly jump in consumer confidence in almost 4 years. The market's rallying on that. You, though, have described it as a stay of execution. Why?
Well, there's a few reasons. The most obvious is that none of the tariffs have really gone away. All of the tariffs that the president has proposed on Liberation Day, the ones that tanked the markets, well, those are simply paused until July. So we could be back right at the same point in just a few weeks. But the other thing is that tariffs actually still remain quite high in historical terms. We're looking at 15, 16%, and that's higher than any point going back almost a century. And that's going to eventually hit the real economy. You hear producers talk about high raw materials prices, companies, retailers talking about compressed margins, and companies like Walmart saying eventually, once their inventories dwindle down, they're going to have to pass those prices on to consumers. And so really, we can celebrate these walkbacks and these EU deals, but there's a lot of time left to see what we're really going to get for the real economy.
How soon do you think that impact is going to be felt? And what happens if we get to July and these 100+ trade deals with partners all over the world haven't been ironed out? Do you anticipate more delays?
I do, and I think that's one of the things that the markets are responding to is optimism that a lot of this stuff goes away, that we end up with a few tariffs here, a few there, but this big Liberation Day push of tariffs of, at one point for China, over 100%.
Yeah, no one would want 100%. 100% tariff is an embargo. 100% tariff is essentially shutting down trade. Like for him to say that 100% tariff is something that was going to be feasible in terms of like a trade partnership, he's being disingenuous there. I'm sure he knows that, right? But he has to come out here and say what he needs to say. The 100% tariff is you're going into a negotiation, you start high, they go low, you settle somewhere in the middle. That's what that is. He knows that.
Vietnam, almost 50%, and then this new EU threat at 50%, that the markets think those are never going to actually materialize, that a lot of that stuff will just keep getting punted down the road. And there is some good reason to think that. The president has continuously shown that he does get a little skittish when markets tank or when the bond market starts having problems. And if that continues, if there's this worry that things are coming back, then again, I think there is good reason to think they'll delay again.
Supporters of the president point to these tariffs as having an immediate impact on getting leverage. And you specifically mentioned China and the 100+% tariff that had been installed and then lowered to 30%. That's been his main target. And the labor market in China has been struggling. There was an estimate that was cited by the New York Times that if tariffs stay at current levels, China could lose 6 million manufacturing jobs. If they go back over 100%, that could reach 9 million. I wonder if you see that as a win for the United States, if that could be used as leverage to force Beijing to start playing by the rules, as the Trump administration says.
Well, it's really difficult because of the Chinese government. They are not nearly as responsive to economic turmoil as is a democracy like the United States. So I think it's a bit of a gamble to say that real economic losses that happen because of this trade war in China really push the Chinese government to negotiate. I mean, look, we've had tariffs on Chinese imports at 25% or higher for years now, going back to about 2018. The Chinese government has not caved. They have not changed any of their problematic.
Yeah, the big difference is this isn't across the board tariffs. I've spoken in earlier videos. The poverty level of China, I believe hovers. Well, if you're part of the poverty class, they classify that as somebody making less than $600 a year in China. In China, and these are figures online. Whatever. They're Google. They're other chat bots that I got these things from. 350 million people in China classify as below the poverty line. So you're talking about 350 million people that are living on less than $600 a year annual. This is like when you talk about staying in power, I get it. CCP, you can't kick them out. They're the party. They're the ruling party. It is what it is. Xi will be there for the foreseeable future. However, when people start starving, that doesn't usually go well in any type of whether it's a dictatorship, whether it's a king and queen rule, whatever the system of government you have. If people start starving, that's a problem. Now, not to say that we should be doing this to starve people. However, it should be said that we should be doing things to put pressure on governments to play by the rules and play fair. And if those things, when we leverage ourselves, if that causes those things to happen, well, that's up to that government, that they should have come to the table and negotiated with us so that their people aren't starving.
Economic policies. And so, simply just ratcheting up tariffs more and expecting a different response, I think is extremely risky, especially given the real damage this is also having for the U.S. economy. There are a lot of American businesses out there that are buying things from China that are not national security related, and that suddenly they're facing huge tax bills of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. That's a tough bullet to bite for those companies.
Scott Linscomb, appreciate the analysis. Thanks for joining us.
And those were fairly good points, but I think ultimately, this is we're seeing kind of the curtain pull back in some of these negotiations. These are things that probably we wouldn't be seeing normally if this was a normal president, right? Trump was not a normal president, right? He's the person that you need to go in there and make a deal. He's the person that if I'm, I've said this many times before, if I'm going to purchase something, I'm not a good negotiator. Somebody tells me the thing is $100. I may say, would you take 80? And they'll say no. And I'll say, all right, here's 100. I'm not a good negotiator, right? That's what he does. Let him do what he does. He's in the unique position right now as being one of the best negotiators ever to negotiate these deals for us in our favor. And that's not just coming from me. There are dozens of people, top level people that are not far right, MAGA or whatever. They just say they've seen Trump work, they've seen how he does it, and he's one of the best. Let this guy do what he does. I think in the end, we'll get a much better deal than we ever could have anticipated, whether, no matter, regardless of who the president would have been, we are at the cusp of something great. I really do think that. Guys, if you can give me a like, a share, or a subscribe, I'll take either one. I'd really appreciate it. But if you do subscribe, it'd be nice because then we'll see you here again on the next video. And again, leave a comment, leave a question or a concern, and we will discuss it in the comments below. Thanks a lot for coming out, and we'll see you again in the next video. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it.